My name is Elena Ross. I am 34 years old. To the outside world, I am just a devoted housewife and mother to a special needs child. But in reality, I am a former senior patent attorney who holds the legal keys to a $200 million empire. I attended my husband Derek's Medical Innovation Award ceremony, where he thanked everyone except me. His vice president of sales whispered to me that it was sweet I used to work in patent law before becoming a mother, implying I could not understand the technical side. She did not know I wrote the code and the claims that built this company. I silently terminated the license to my $200 million patents and sent notice to his board. Within 18 hours, my phone had 50 missed calls, and the investors demanded I attend the emergency meeting. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to remind someone exactly who you are. The grand ballroom of the Four Seasons Hotel in Boston was suffocatingly cold, despite the hundreds of bodies pressed together. The air smelled of expensive cologne white lilies and the metallic tang of chilled champagne. I stood near the back of the room by the velvet ropes, trying to make myself as small as possible. I was wearing a beige silk dress that I had bought off the rack at Macy's 3 years ago. It was modest and clean, but compared to the glittering designer gowns and custom tuxedos surrounding me, I looked like the hired help. I clutched my clutch bag tightly, my knuckles turning white. My husband Derek Ross stood on the illuminated stage, looking like a golden god. The spotlight caught the sharp angles of his jaw and the perfectly tailored lines of his $5,000 Italian suit. He was smiling that charismatic smile that had charmed investors and magazines for the past year. He held the heavy crystal trophy above his head as the room erupted in thunderous applause. This was the National Medical Innovation Award, the Oscar of the biotech world. He had won it for the neural graft technology, a revolutionary device that could help paralyzed patients regain mobility. "Thank you, everyone," Derek said into the microphone, his voice smooth and commanding. The room went silent instantly, hanging on his every word. "This award belongs not just to me, but to the incredible team at Novus MedTech." He gestured to the front table where the board members and key executives sat. They beamed back at him, raising their glasses. I watched from the shadows, my heart hammering a slow, painful rhythm against my ribs. I waited. I was not asking for a spotlight. I was not asking for him to call me up on stage. I was just waiting for my name. Just a simple acknowledgement. Just a nod to the person who had made this moment possible. I remembered the nights 3 years ago when this technology was just a scribbled mess on a napkin. Derek had the idea, but he had no idea how to protect it. He did not understand intellectual property law. He did not understand that a brilliant idea is worthless if you do not own the rights to it. I was the one who had stayed up until 4 in the morning for 6 months straight. I was the one who drafted the 300-page patent application. I was the one who fought the patent examiners in Washington, D.C. when they tried to reject our claims. I was the one who structured the complex licensing agreement that allowed his startup to exist without being sued by the pharmaceutical giants. I did all of that while pregnant with our daughter Emma. I did all of that while he slept. I would like to thank my investors for believing in my vision when this was just a dream. Derek continued, his voice trembling with practiced emotion. I want to thank my brilliant engineering team for turning my sketches into reality. And of course, I want to thank my Vice President of Sales, Sienna Vance, for her tireless dedication to bringing this product to the world. The camera panned to Sienna. She was sitting at the VIP table, wearing a scarlet-red dress that looked like it cost more than my car. She blew a kiss to the stage, her eyes sparkling with something that looked far too intimate for a colleague. Derek smiled back at her, a warmth in his eyes that I had not seen directed at me in years. And finally, Derek said, lowering his voice for dramatic effect, "I want to thank the most loyal companion a man could ask for, my golden retriever Buster." There were chuckles from the audience. Yes, even on the darkest nights when I wanted to give up, that dog was the only one who sat by my feet and gave me the emotional support to keep going. "Thank you, Buster. This is for you, buddy." The room exploded in laughter and applause again. I stood frozen. The blood drained from my face, leaving me feeling lightheaded and sick. He had thanked the dog. He had thanked the investors. He had thanked the woman who had only joined the company 6 months ago. But he had not said my name. He had not mentioned his wife. He had not mentioned the mother of his child. He had not mentioned the attorney who had saved his company from bankruptcy before it even started. It was not an accident. I knew Derek. He was meticulous. He rehearsed his speeches for days in front of the mirror. Every word was calculated. Every omission was intentional. This was not forgetfulness. This was erasure. I looked at him on that stage, basking in the adoration of his peers, and I realized with a sudden terrifying clarity that I was no longer part of his narrative. In his mind, he was the genius inventor who did it all alone. I was just the baggage from his past, the boring housewife who stayed home with the sick child while he conquered the world. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne and bumped into me. "Oh, excuse me, ma'am," he mumbled without looking at me, his eyes fixed on the stage. He did not even see me. Nobody saw me. I was invisible. I looked down at my hands. They were shaking, not from sadness. I realized with a jolt that I was not sad. I was not going to cry. The stinging sensation in my eyes was not tears. It was the burning heat of rage. But it was a cold rage. A quiet, calculated rage. The kind of rage that only a lawyer knows how to channel. I looked at Derek one last time. He was laughing with the host, holding the trophy like a weapon. He thought he had won. He thought he controlled the neural graft technology. He thought he was the king of the world. He had forgotten one small technical detail, a detail that was buried in Section 14, Paragraph 3 of the licensing agreement I had written for him. He did not own the patent. Novus Medtech did not own the patent. I did. I turned around and walked out of the ballroom. My heels clicked against the marble floor, but the sound was drowned out by the applause for my husband. I did not look back. I walked through the gilded lobby, past the doorman, who looked through me, and out into the cool Boston night. The valet brought my 10-year-old Honda Civic around. It sputtered as I turned the ignition, a stark contrast to the rows of limousines and luxury sports cars lined up behind me. As I drove away from the hotel, the glowing lights of the Four Seasons faded in my rearview mirror. I gripped the steering wheel tightly. Derek had made a choice tonight. He had chosen to rewrite history. He had chosen to humiliate me by pretending I did not exist. He probably thought I would go home and cry into my pillow. He probably thought I would wait up for him to congratulate him and accept his excuses about running out of time. He was wrong. I was not going home to cry. I was going home to check the legal files in my basement. If he wanted to play the role of the genius inventor who did not need his wife, then I would let him. I would show him exactly what his genius was worth without my legal protection. It was worth 0. The game had changed, and he did not even know the clock was ticking. The heavy oak doors of the ballroom closed behind me, muffling the thunderous applause that was still ringing in my ears. The silence in the hallway was sudden and jarring. I took a deep breath, trying to steady the trembling in my hands. I needed a moment, just one moment to compose myself before I had to face the world again. I walked down the long carpeted corridor towards the ladies' lounge. My reflection in the gilded mirrors along the wall looked pale and ghostly. The beige dress, which had felt elegant in my bedroom, now looked washed out under the harsh crystal chandeliers of the hotel. I looked like a shadow, a ghost haunting the edges of my husband's life. I pushed open the door to the restroom. It was empty, thank God. The space was opulent, lined with pink marble, and lit by soft, flattering lights. I walked over to the row of sinks and turned on the cold water. I let it run over my wrists, watching the water swirl down the drain. I splashed some on my face, trying to wash away the heat of humiliation. I stared at myself in the mirror. 34 years old. I looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep does not fix. It was the exhaustion of 5 years of giving everything to someone else. I touched the fine lines around my eyes. These were new. Or maybe I just had not looked at myself closely in a long time. I had been too busy looking at Derek, too busy making sure his tie was straight, his speech was polished, his patent applications were perfect. The door behind me swung open with a confident swoosh. I froze. Through the mirror, I saw a flash of scarlet red silk. It was Sienna Vance. Of course it was. She walked in bringing a wave of energy that sucked the air out of the room. Up close, she was even more stunning than she had looked on the screen. Her skin was flawless, glowing with the kind of health that comes from expensive facials and zero stress. She was 26, the age I was when I met Derek, the age I was when I was a rising star at Sterling and Partners, the age I was before I became just a wife. Sienna did not seem surprised to see me. In fact, she smiled as if she had been expecting me. She walked to the sink next to mine, placing her designer clutch on the marble counter with a sharp click. She pulled out a tube of ruby red lipstick and began to reapply it, staring at her own reflection with practiced vanity. She did not look at me, not at first. She let the silence stretch out a power move designed to make me feel uncomfortable, to make me feel like I was intruding on her space. "Great speech, right?" she said, suddenly her voice bright and chirpy. Derek was so nervous about it. He kept pacing around the office all day. I had to tell him, "Derek, you are a genius. Just go out there and be yourself." She pressed her lips together, checking the color. It is amazing to see him finally get the recognition he deserves. He has worked so hard on this technology. I dried my hands on a paper towel, moving slowly. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run, but my feet were rooted to the spot. I could not let her see me run. "Yes," I said, my voice sounding calm despite the storm inside me. "He has worked hard. We both have." Sienna stopped. She turned her head slowly to look at me. Her eyes swept over my beige dress, lingering for a second on the slightly frayed hem before moving up to my face. There was no kindness in her eyes, only a sharp, predatory amusement. She let out a small laugh, a sound that was meant to be friendly but felt like a paper cut. "Oh, right," she said, tilting her head. "Derek mentions you all the time." "Elena, right. He told me you used to work in patent law before you had your daughter. Before you became a full-time mom." "Used to." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. She said it as if my career was a cute little hobby I had dabbled in during college, as if I had worked at a coffee shop instead of being a senior associate at one of the top firms in Boston, as if I had not graduated top of my class from Harvard Law. "That must have been nice," she continued, turning back to the mirror to fix a stray hair. "But honestly, I do not know how you sit through these events. They must be so boring for you. I mean, patent law is one thing, but the actual science, the neural grafting technology, it is so complex." Derek was explaining the synaptic bridge architecture to me the other night over dinner, and my head was spinning. "And I work in the industry." She paused, looking at me through the mirror again. Her smile widened, revealing perfect white teeth. "It must be so hard when you do not understand the technical side of things, when you cannot really share in his world. But that is sweet, though, that you come to support him anyway, even if you are just sitting on the sidelines." The rage that had been simmering in my chest since the ballroom flared up hot and blinding. Sitting on the sidelines, not understanding the technical side. I felt a laugh bubbling up in my throat, a hysterical, dangerous laugh. She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea. I remembered the night Derek had come home with the first prototype. It was a mess of wires and code that crashed every 10 minutes. He wanted to give up. He wanted to sell the concept to a larger company for pennies just to pay off our credit card debt. I was the one who stopped him. I was the one who sat at our kitchen table surrounded by stacks of biology textbooks and legal precedents, teaching myself the intricacies of neurobiology so I could draft the claims. I wrote the definition of the synaptic bridge architecture that she found so complex. I defined the scope of the invention. I created the legal fortress that prevented competitors from stealing it. I did not just understand the technical side. I had translated the technical side into the language of power. I had turned his messy idea into a monopoly. But she did not see that. All she saw was a tired woman in an old dress. All she saw was the wife who stayed home. She saw a victim. She saw someone she could crush under her expensive heel without a second thought. I looked at her, really looked at her. Beneath the makeup and the arrogance, I saw something else. Insecurity. She was marking her territory. She was trying to prove to herself that she was the important one, that she was the partner Derek needed. She was trying to erase me just like Derek had done on stage. I took a step closer to her. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I let the lawyer take over, the part of me that used to tear apart hostile witnesses in courtrooms, the part of me I had suppressed for 5 years to be a gentle, supportive wife. I straightened my spine. My face settled into a mask of cool indifference. "You are right, Sienna," I said softly. My voice was steady, devoid of any emotion. "I do not understand the engineering. I could not build a neural graph to save my life. I am not an engineer." Sienna's smile turned triumphant. She thought she had won. She thought I was conceding. She snapped her clutch shut, ready to leave, satisfied with her little victory. But I was not finished. However, I continued holding her gaze in the mirror. "There is one thing I do understand better than anyone in this room, better than Derek, and certainly better than you." Sienna paused, her hand hovering over the door handle. She looked confused. "Oh, and what is that?" I smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was a cold, sharp smile, the kind of smile a shark gives before it drags you under. "Ownership," I said. The word hung in the air between us. Simple, heavy, final. Sienna blinked. She looked at me, trying to decipher if I was making a joke. She did not understand. How could she? She thought ownership meant having your name on the door or holding the trophy on stage. She did not know that ownership was a legal concept. A piece of paper, a signature, a clause in a contract that could turn a billionaire into a beggar with the stroke of a pen. She let out a short, dismissive laugh. "You are funny, Elena," she said, shaking her head. "Strange, but funny. No wonder Derek says you are intense. Anyway, I should get back. The investors are waiting for me. We have a big toast planned." She pulled the door open. A blast of noise from the party drifted in. "You should go home soon," she added over her shoulder, her voice dripping with fake concern. "You look exhausted. Get some rest. You have a long day of mommy duties tomorrow, I am sure." She stepped out, and the heavy door swung shut behind her. She was gone, but she left something behind, a cloud of heavy floral scent. Chanel No. 5. It filled the small room, thick and cloying, choking the air. It smelled like money and arrogance. It smelled like my husband's shirts when he came home late from work, claiming he had been at a board meeting. I stood there alone in the silence. My heart was pounding against my ribs, a slow, heavy drumbeat. Ownership. I whispered the word to myself again. It tasted sweet. Sienna thought she was the queen of the castle because she wore the crown. She did not realize that I owned the land the castle was built on, and I was about to pull the foundation out from under them. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. The tired woman was gone. The sad wife was gone. In her place was Elena Ross, senior patent attorney, and she was ready to go to work. I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. It was time to go home. It was time to open the safe. It was time to remind Derek and Sienna and the entire world that you should never bite the hand that wrote your license. I walked out of the restroom. I did not go back to the ballroom. I walked straight to the exit. As I passed the open doors of the gala, I saw Derek raising a glass of champagne with Sienna by his side. They were laughing. They looked invincible. Enjoy it, I thought, as I pushed through the revolving doors into the cold night air. Enjoy the champagne. Enjoy the applause. Because by tomorrow morning, the only thing you will own is that suit on your back. And even that might be up for negotiation. The limousine glided through the Ted Williams tunnel, the hum of the engine barely audible inside the soundproofed cabin. Outside the tinted windows, the amber lights of the tunnel blurred into streaks of gold, but inside it was pitch black, save for the faint blue glow of the climate control panel. The air smelled of expensive leather and the stale metallic reek of whiskey coming from the man beside me. Derek was passed out, sprawled across the seat with his mouth slightly open. His bow tie was undone, hanging loose around his neck like a dead snake. He looked less like the titan of industry he had pretended to be on stage, and more like an exhausted child who had partied too hard. I sat rigid against the door, putting as much distance between us as the car allowed. My hands were folded in my lap. I was not crying. I had passed the point of tears back in the hotel bathroom when Sienna Vance had looked at me with that pitying sneer. Now I was just numb, a cold, clinical numbness that spread through my chest and sharpened my senses. I watched Derek sleep. I watched the rise and fall of his chest. I wondered how someone could look so peaceful after erasing his wife from his life in front of 500 people. I wondered if he dreamed of me, or if I was absent from his subconscious, just as I was absent from his acceptance speech. The silence was broken by a vibration, a harsh, persistent buzzing sound against the leather console between us. Derek's phone. It lit up, illuminating the cabin with a harsh white light. Then it went dark. Then it lit up again and again. A relentless stream of notifications. Normally, I would never look. I was the good wife. I respected his privacy. I trusted him implicitly, even when he came home late smelling of perfume that was not mine, even when he took calls in the garden at midnight. I had convinced myself that he was under pressure, that he was building our future, that I needed to be the supportive, silent partner. But tonight the rules had changed. Tonight he had publicly declared that I was nobody, and if I was nobody, then I had no obligations to respect the privacy of a stranger. I reached out my hand, hovering over the device. The screen flashed again. A message preview popped up. It was from a contact saved simply as SV Sienna Vance. You were amazing tonight, baby. The way you handled the room was masterful. I cannot wait until we can celebrate properly. Just the two of us. No baggage. My heart did not break. It did not even flutter. It was as if I was reading a case file for a client. Facts, evidence, confirmation. I had known it intuitively, but seeing it in writing turned suspicion into actionable data. Sienna was sleeping with him. Of course she was. It explained the promotion. It explained the late nights. It explained why she felt comfortable enough to insult me to my face. But then another message appeared. This one was not from Sienna. It was from a contact named Arthur Penhaligon. I recognized the name immediately. He was Derek's personal shark, a high-priced divorce attorney known for his scorched earth tactics. My breath hitched in my throat. Why was his divorce lawyer texting him at 1 a.m. on the night of his biggest triumph? I picked up the phone. Derek did not stir. He let out a soft snore, oblivious to the fact that his life was currently in my hands. I unlocked the screen. He had never changed his passcode. It was still my birthday. The irony was almost laughable. I tapped the green icon and opened the message thread with Arthur. What I read made my blood turn to ice. It was not just a conversation. It was a war plan. Arthur wrote, "The papers are drafted and ready for your signature. Per our strategy, we will wait until exactly 48 hours after the IPO closes next Friday. Once the company goes public and the market capitalization hits the projected $1 billion mark, your equity will be secured." I scrolled up, reading the history. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, the cold calculations, the deliberate dismantling of my life. Arthur continued into the next text. Remember, the prenuptial agreement she signed 10 years ago is ironclad regarding equity. It explicitly states that any assets derived from stock options or business ownership are separate property. Since Novus Medtech was incorporated after the marriage, but the initial seed capital came from your separate account, she has no claim to the shares. We will offer her the statutory minimum alimony for 3 years. If she contests it, we will bury her in litigation until she runs out of money. She has been out of the workforce for 5 years. She has no income. She will fold. I stared at the glowing screen. The words blurred for a second, then snapped back into razor-sharp focus. Statutory minimum. Bury her. She will fold. They had not just planned to leave me, they had planned to destroy me. They wanted to wait for the initial public offering to happen, so Derek would become a billionaire on paper, and then they would serve me with divorce papers, knowing that the prenup would cut me off from that wealth. They were banking on the fact that I was just a housewife. They were banking on the fact that I had signed that prenup when I was 24, young, and blindly in love, believing that we would build everything together. They thought I was weak. They thought I was stupid. Arthur's last message read, "Enjoy your night, Derek. You have earned it. Once the bell rings on Wall Street next week, you will be a free man with a 10-figure net worth, and the dead weight will be gone." Dead weight. That was what I was to them. Dead weight. I lowered the phone slowly, placing it back on the console exactly as I had found it. I looked at Derek. He shifted in his sleep, a small smile playing on his lips. He was probably dreaming of that billion-dollar valuation. He was dreaming of his new life with Sienna. He was dreaming of the freedom money could buy. He had forgotten who I was. He had forgotten that before I was his wife, before I was Emma's mother, I was Elena Ross, top of my class at Harvard Law. He had forgotten that I was the one who redlined that prenup 10 years ago. He was right about one thing. The prenup did protect his shares. It protected his equity in the company. But he had made a fatal error. An error born of arrogance and ignorance, an error that only a non-technical founder would make. The value of Novus MedTech was not in the office furniture. It was not in the bank accounts. It was not even in the employees. The entire billion-dollar valuation rested on one single thing: the intellectual property, the patent for the neural graft. And Derek did not own the patent. I closed my eyes and let my mind travel back 3 years. I remembered sitting at the dining table surrounded by stacks of paper. I remembered Derek begging me to fix the legal structure because investors were worried about liability. I remembered suggesting that we hold the patent in a separate holding entity to protect it from lawsuits. I remembered him waving his hand, dismissing the details, saying, "You handle it, Elena. Just get it done so I can get the funding." So I did handle it. I assigned the patent to EV Holdings LLC, a company solely owned by me, and I granted Novus MedTech an exclusive license to use the patent, a license that was revocable. I opened my eyes. The numbness was gone. In its place was a burning clarity, a surge of adrenaline that made my fingers tingle. "You want to play the law?" "Derek," I whispered into the darkness. "Okay, let's play. You think the prenup is your shield. You think the IPO is your victory lap. You think you can use my sacrifice to build your throne and then kick me down the stairs. You have calculated everything perfectly except for one variable. You built your castle on my land, and you just handed me the eviction notice." I looked out the window. We were exiting the tunnel now, the city lights of Boston rising up around us like a fortress. I checked the time on my own phone. It was 1:45 in the morning. I had work to do. I did not feel like a victim anymore. The heartbreak which had threatened to consume me an hour ago had calcified into something harder, something sharper. I looked at my sleeping husband one last time. I felt a strange sense of pity for him. He was sleeping so soundly. He had no idea that he was already bankrupt. He had no idea that the woman sitting next to him, the woman he called dead weight, was about to become the executioner of his dreams. The car slowed down, turning into the long driveway of our estate. The house was dark, waiting for us. But I would not be sleeping tonight. "Sleep well, Derek," I thought as the car came to a halt. "Sleep well, because this is the last peaceful night you will ever have. When you wake up, you won't just be losing a wife, you will be losing your company, your reputation, and every single dollar you think you have secured." I opened the car door before the driver could come around. The cold night air hit my face, bracing and clean. I stepped out, my heels crunching on the gravel. I walked towards the front door, not waiting for him. I walked with purpose. I walked with the stride of a senior patent attorney entering a courtroom. The verdict was already in, and the sentence was total annihilation. The morning sun sliced through the floor-to-ceiling windows of our kitchen, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was a perfect, crisp Boston morning, the kind of morning that usually signaled a fresh start. But as I stood by the granite island brewing a fresh pot of dark roast coffee, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. I had not slept. I had spent the hours between 2 and 6 in the morning, sitting in the dark in the guest room staring at the ceiling and replaying the text messages in my head. Statutory minimum, dead weight. The words had burned themselves into my retinas. I heard the heavy footsteps coming down the stairs. Derek. He walked into the kitchen looking surprisingly fresh for a man who had consumed half a bottle of whiskey in a limousine a few hours ago. He was wearing his power suit, a charcoal gray 3-piece number that he usually saved for board meetings. He was already in CEO mode. His eyes were glued to his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. He did not look at me. He walked straight to the coffee machine, poured himself a mug, and took a long sip. "Morning," He grunted, finally acknowledging my presence. "Good morning, Derek," I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of the woman he thought I was, the docile, supportive wife. I turned around and placed a plate of scrambled eggs and avocado toast in front of him, just like I did every morning. He sat down at the island, ignoring the food. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. He slapped them down on the pristine countertop. The sound echoed in the quiet kitchen like a gunshot. "I need you to sign these," he said, not looking up from his phone. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked over. "What are they?" I asked innocently. "Just standard tax stuff," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "The IPO is next week and the accountants are breathing down my neck. We need to consolidate some assets for tax purposes before the filing. Just sign where the yellow sticky notes are. I need to take them with me to the office." I looked at the stack of papers. He had paper clipped the pages together so that only the signature lines were visible. It was a classic trick, one that I had seen sleazy landlords use on unsuspecting tenants, but Derek was trying to pull it on a senior patent attorney. I reached for the pen he held out, but I did not sign immediately. I pretended to adjust my glasses. "I need to read them first, Derek," I said softly. "You know I do not like signing things blindly." Derek let out a dramatic sigh. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with impatience. "Elena, it is just tax forms. It is standard boilerplate. Do you really need to waste time reading legal jargon you would not understand anyway? I am late for a meeting with the underwriters." I ignored him. I lifted the first page, peeling back the clip he had so carefully placed. My eyes scanned the text. It took me less than 3 seconds to realize what this was. This was not a tax form. The document was titled Spousal Waiver of Community Property Rights and Consent to Separate Assignment. I read the first paragraph. "I, the undersigned spouse, hereby acknowledge that all shares, stock options, and equity interests in Novus Medtech held by Derek Ross are his sole and separate property. I hereby waive any and all claims to said property, including any increase in value that has occurred during the marriage." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. The trap. If I signed this, I would be signing away my rights to 50% of the company. I would be signing away the leverage I had. The prenuptial agreement protected his initial investment, but it did not protect the massive increase in value that had happened during our marriage, especially since I had contributed labor to the company. Unless I signed this specific waiver, he was trying to trick me into disinheriting myself 5 days before he became a billionaire. I looked at the next page. It was even worse. It was a retroactive quit-claim deed for the house. He was trying to get me to sign over the house, too, under the guise of asset protection. "Are you done yet?" Derek snapped, tapping his fingers on the marble. "I told you it is boring stuff." I looked at him. He was not even sweating. He was so confident in my stupidity. He truly believed that the woman who cooked his eggs and ironed his shirts had lost the ability to read a contract. He thought my brain had atrophied. I could not sign this, but I could not refuse to sign it either. Not yet. If I refused, he would know that I was on to him. He would know that I had seen the texts. He would call his lawyers and they would find another way to hurt me. I needed to buy time. I needed him to leave the house thinking that I was just a harmless, clumsy idiot. I needed to initiate the sequence I had planned in the car last night. I looked at the coffee mug sitting next to the papers. It was full, steaming hot. "Oh, Derek," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "This paragraph here about the Section 83 election, is this?" I reached across the table, pretending to point at a line of text. As I did, my elbow connected with his coffee mug. I put just enough force behind it. The heavy ceramic mug tipped over. "No!" Derek shouted, but it was too late. The dark brown liquid surged across the counter like a tidal wave. It soaked into the crisp white papers instantly. The black ink of the contract began to bleed. The document turned into a soggy brown mess within seconds. The hot coffee dripped off the edge of the island onto Derek's expensive suit pants. "Oh my God," I gasped, jumping back and grabbing a handful of paper towels. "I am so sorry, Derek. I am so clumsy. I did not mean to—" "Oh God, let me clean it up." I started frantically dabbing at the ruined papers, making sure to smear the ink even more, rendering the signature lines completely illegible. Derek stood up so fast his bar stool scraped loudly against the floor. He looked at the brown stain spreading on his trousers. His face turned a deep shade of red. The veins in his neck bulged. "You idiot!" he hissed. He grabbed the soggy pile of papers and threw them into the trash can. "I am sorry," I repeated, looking down at the floor, playing the part of the terrified wife. "I will print them out again. Just email them to me. I will sign them and bring them to your office later." "No," Derek barked. "You have done enough damage." He grabbed his briefcase and stormed towards the door. He stopped in the archway and turned back to look at me. His eyes were cold, filled with a disgust that made my skin crawl. "Look at you," he said, his voice dripping with venom. "You cannot even sign a piece of paper without causing a disaster. You are useless, Elena. Honestly, it is a good thing you gave up your career. You would have been eaten alive in a courtroom. You cannot even handle a kitchen counter." He turned and walked out. I heard the front door slam shut, shaking the frame of the house. Then I heard the roar of his engine as he sped away. I stood in the silence of the kitchen. The smell of spilled coffee was strong in the air. I looked at the trash can where the ruined contract lay. Slowly, I straightened my spine. I dropped the paper towels on the counter. The terrified expression vanished from my face. I walked over to the trash can and looked down at the soggy mess. "You are right, Derek," I whispered to the empty room. "I would be eaten alive in a courtroom if I was the woman you think I am. But fortunately for me, and unfortunately for you, I am not her." I walked over to the sink and washed my hands. The water was cool and refreshing. I felt lighter. He had taken the bait. He thought I was incompetent. He thought the papers were ruined because of an accident. He would have his lawyers draft new ones. It would take them at least 24 hours to get them ready again. 24 hours was all I needed. I dried my hands and walked to the wall-mounted intercom system. I pressed the button for the basement. "Wake up," I said to the empty house. I walked to the pantry and pushed aside the heavy shelving unit that held the canned goods. Behind it was a reinforced steel door. I punched in the code, 7142, the date I passed the bar exam. The door clicked open. I stepped into the cool, climate-controlled air of my home office. This was my sanctuary. This was where the real work happened. Derek thought this room was just storage for old holiday decorations. He never came down here. I sat down at my desk. 3 monitors hummed to life. On the center screen was the file I had opened last night, the revocation of license. I picked up the phone. I dialed a number I had not called in 5 years. "Sterling and Partners. How may I direct your call?" "I need to speak with Managing Partner James Sterling," I said. "I am sorry, ma'am. Mr. Sterling is in a meeting. May I ask who is calling?" "Tell him it is Elena Vance," I said. "Tell him the patent is coming home." There was a pause, a silence on the other end of the line, then a sudden flurry of movement. "Hold on 1 second, Miss Vance. Putting you through immediately." I leaned back in my chair. Above me in the main house, the sun was shining on a happy domestic scene. But down here in the dark, the war had just begun. Derek wanted me to sign papers. Oh, I would sign papers. But they would not be the ones he expected. I watched the cursor blink on the screen. The document was ready. It was a nuclear bomb wrapped in legal stationery, and I was about to press the launch button. "Hello, Elena," a deep, familiar voice came through the speaker. "It has been a long time." "Hello, James," I said. "I hope you have kept my old office empty. I am going to need it today." "And James, bring the litigation team. We are going to kill a unicorn." I hung up the phone. I looked at the time. It was 8:30 in the morning. By 5 o'clock, Novus MedTech would effectively cease to exist as a viable entity. I stood up and walked to the closet in the corner of the office. I pulled out the garment bag I had hidden there years ago. I unzipped it. Inside was my favorite white suit, the one I wore when I won my first major infringement case. It still smelled faintly of dry cleaning and ambition. I stripped off the coffee-stained house dress. I put on the silk blouse. I buttoned the trousers. I slipped into the blazer. It fit perfectly, like armor. I caught my reflection in the dark monitor of the computer. The woman looking back at me was not a housewife. She was not a victim. She was a shark who smelled blood in the water. Derek said I was useless. He said I could not handle the pressure. He was about to find out that I was the pressure. I grabbed my briefcase and headed for the stairs. The clumsy wife was gone. The executioner had arrived. The roar of Derek's engine faded into the distance, leaving a silence so profound it felt heavy. I stood in the middle of the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the house settle. The refrigerator hummed. The coffee maker hissed as the last drops of the brew hit the pot. A minute ago, I had been the clumsy, trembling wife apologizing for ruining a suit. Now, as the silence stretched out, the trembling stopped completely. My posture straightened. The mask of the terrified housewife evaporated, leaving behind the cold, hard face of the woman I used to be, the woman I still was underneath the apron and the silence. I did not clean up the spilled coffee. Let it stain the marble. Let it be a monument to the morning Derek Ross lost everything. I turned on my heel and walked towards the pantry. To anyone visiting our home, this was just a storage closet filled with organic pasta sauce and high-end olive oil. But to me, it was the gateway to the truth. I pushed aside the heavy shelving unit on the far wall. It swung open on silent, well-oiled hinges, revealing a heavy steel door that looked completely out of place in a suburban mansion. Derek hated this door. He called it paranoid. He said it was ridiculous to have a panic room in a gated community. He had never stepped foot inside it. He thought I used it to store old tax returns and sentimental junk from my childhood. He was wrong. It was not a panic room. It was a war room. I punched the code into the keypad. 7294. The date I won my first federal appeal. The lock clicked with a satisfying mechanical thud, and I stepped inside. The air in the basement was cool and dry, smelling faintly of ozone and old paper. It was a stark contrast to the perfumed warmth of the upstairs world. Here, everything was sterile, organized, logical. In the corner of the room sat a large fireproof safe. It was an ugly gray block of steel that I had bought at an auction from a closing law firm 10 years ago. Derek had laughed at it when the movers brought it in. He asked why I needed such an ugly thing to store our marriage certificate and passports. I told him it was for safety. He did not know that the safety I was ensuring was not for us, but for me. I spun the dial. Left to 10, right to 35, left to 11. The handle turned. The heavy door swung open. There were no jewels inside, no stacks of cash, no secret love letters. There was only one thing that mattered, a single thick leather-bound binder. I pulled it out. The leather was cool under my fingers. I carried it over to the metal desk in the center of the room and switched on the halogen lamp. The harsh white light flooded the cover of the binder. Embossed in gold letters were the words, Neural Graft Technology Master File. I opened it. The first page was not a technical schematic. It was not a drawing of a brain. It was a document issued by the United States Patent and Trademark Office. At the top, in bold formal type, it read, United States Patent, number 98421. I ran my finger down the page past the abstract, past the technical field classification, until I reached the section that mattered. The section that Derek had never bothered to read because he was too busy picking out the color of the office furniture. Assignee EV Holdings LLC, Delaware. I allowed myself a small, dry smile. Derek thought EV Holdings was just some generic shell company I had set up for tax purposes. He probably thought EV stood for Electronic Ventures or Early Vision. He never asked. He never cared. He just signed where I told him to sign because he hated paperwork, and he trusted his lawyer wife to handle the boring stuff. EV stood for Elena Vance. I turned the page to the licensing agreement. This was the document that governed the relationship between my holding company and Derek's operating company, Novus Medtech. It was a masterpiece of legal engineering, a fortress I had built to protect the technology from lawsuits, bankruptcy, and yes, even from my own husband. I remembered the day I drafted this. I was 8 months pregnant with Emma. My ankles were swollen and my back ached, but my mind was razor sharp. I knew the statistics. I knew that 90% of startups fail. I knew that founders often got sued. I knew that if Derek crashed the company, I needed to make sure the underlying technology, the actual invention, did not go down with the ship. So I separated them. I put the patent in a box that only I had the key to. I looked at the consideration clause. In exchange for the exclusive right to utilize, manufacture, and sell products based on the patent licensee, agrees to pay licensor an annual fee of $1 US. $1. That was what I had charged him. $1 a year, practically free. It was a symbol of my love, a symbol of my belief in him. I gave him the right to build a billion-dollar empire on my land for the price of a gumball. I gave him the world, and I asked for nothing in return. I did not ask for a salary. I did not ask for royalties. I just asked him to be a good husband and a good father. And in return, he planned to leave me with the statutory minimum. He wanted to divorce me. He wanted to claim that the company was his separate property because I had signed a prenup. He thought he was so clever. He thought that because Novus Medtech was growing in value, he would get to keep it all. He forgot one crucial detail. Novus Medtech did not own the product it was selling. It was a tenant, and I was the landlord. I turned to page 45. This was the page I had been thinking about all night. The page that had kept me sane while Sienna insulted me in the bathroom. The page that was about to turn Derek's victory parade into a funeral procession. Article 14, Termination. My eyes scanned down to section 14.3. I read the words aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. Licensor reserves the right to immediately and unilaterally terminate this agreement without prior notice and without penalty in the event of a change of control, gross negligence, or breach of fiduciary duty by the licensee. Furthermore, licensor may terminate this agreement immediately if licensee or its principal officers engage in conduct involving moral turpitude that could damage the reputation of the patent or the licensor. I ran my finger over the words moral turpitude. In legal terms, it was a broad phrase. But in the context of this contract, which I had written myself, I knew exactly what it covered. It covered fraud. It covered lying to investors. And it certainly covered conspiring with your divorce attorney to defraud your spouse of their equitable interest in the marital estate while publicly humiliating them with your mistress. Derek thought the IPO was his finish line. He thought that once the bell rang on Wall Street, he would be untouchable. He did not realize that the entire valuation of the company, the entire $1 billion projection, was based on the exclusive right to use the neural graph patent. Without this license, Novus Medtech was just a company with a nice office and a lot of expensive stationery. They could not sell the product. They could not manufacture the product. They could not even talk about the product without infringing on my rights. If I invoked Clause 14.3, the license would vanish instantly. The $1 billion would evaporate like mist. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. Derek Ross, CEO, Novus Medtech. His signature was large and flamboyant, looping across the page with arrogant confidence. Below it was my signature. Elena Vance Manager, EV Holdings, LLC, small, neat, precise. He had signed his own death warrant 3 years ago, and he did not even know it. I sat back in the metal chair feeling a rush of adrenaline that was almost intoxicating. For 5 years, I had been the silent partner. I had been the one who smoothed things over. When Derek insulted a board member, I fixed it. When he overspent the budget, I balanced the books. When he forgot an anniversary, I bought my own gift and pretended it was from him. I had made myself small so he could feel big, but he had broken the one rule of our partnership. He had mistaken my kindness for weakness. He thought that because I was a mother, I was no longer a shark. He thought that because I baked cookies, I had forgotten how to butcher a hostile witness. He was about to learn a very painful lesson in contract law. I reached for the scanner on the desk. I needed to digitize this. I needed to send it to the people who actually mattered. Not Derek. Derek was irrelevant now. I needed to send this to the board of directors, to the Securities and Exchange Commission, to the investment banks underwriting the IPO. They needed to know that the emperor had no clothes, or rather that the emperor's clothes belonged to his wife and she was taking them back. I placed the document on the glass platen of the scanner. The light hummed as it swept across the page, capturing the evidence of my ownership. I watched the digital file appear on my screen. It looked so simple, just a PDF, but it was a torpedo aimed directly at the hull of Derek's ship. I thought about Sienna. I thought about her smug face in the mirror telling me I didn't understand the technical side. I wondered if she understood the technical side of bankruptcy. I wondered if she understood that her stock options, which she was probably counting on to buy a new penthouse, were about to become worthless. I thought about the 50 missed calls I would get later today. I thought about the panic in Derek's voice. I thought about the way he would beg, and I felt absolutely nothing. The love I had for him had died last night in that ballroom. It had been killed by his indifference and buried by his betrayal. What was left was not a wife. What was left was a creditor, and I was calling in the debt. I saved the file. I named it Notice of Termination Novus License. I looked at the clock. It was time. The markets would be opening soon. The analysts would be talking about the bright future of Novus MedTech. They would be hyping the stock. I hovered my mouse over the email icon. I had the distribution list ready. Every major stakeholder was on it. This was not just about money. If it was just about money, I would have let him divorce me and fought for a settlement. This was about respect. It was about legacy. It was about proving that the person who builds the foundation is the one who holds the power, not the person who stands on the balcony waving at the crowd. I took a deep breath. The air in the basement felt electrified. "Goodbye, Derek," I whispered. I clicked send. The progress bar moved across the screen. Sending, sent. It was done. The kill switch had been activated. I stood up and closed the binder. I placed it back in the safe and spun the dial, locking it away. I did not need the physical copy anymore. The digital warhead was already flying through cyberspace. I walked out of the panic room and closed the heavy steel door. I pushed the shelf of pasta sauce back into place, hiding the entrance. I walked out of the pantry and back into my sunny kitchen. The spilled coffee was still on the counter, sticky and brown. I grabbed a cloth and began to wipe it up. I cleaned the surface until it shone. I washed the mug. I dried it and put it away. By the time I was finished, the kitchen was perfect again, just like the perfect housewife Derek wanted me to be. I walked to the living room and sat down on the sofa. I picked up a magazine. I crossed my legs. I waited. It would not be long now. The emails were landing in inboxes across Boston and New York. Phones were starting to buzz. Assistants were running into offices with pale faces. The first domino had fallen, and I was going to enjoy watching the rest of them crash down. I drove into the city with the windows down, letting the wind whip through the car. The drive from the suburbs to the financial district was usually a slog of traffic and frustration, but today the highway felt like a runway. I was not driving a minivan full of soccer equipment. I was driving a chariot of war. My white suit was crisp against the seatbelt. I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. The soft, accommodating eyes of Elena the housewife were gone. In their place were the flinty, hard eyes of Elena Vance the litigator. I pulled up to the curb in front of the Sterling Tower. It was a 50-story monolith of glass and steel that pierced the Boston skyline. I tossed the keys to the valet. He looked at my Honda Civic with a sneer, then looked at my face, and the sneer vanished. He saw the way I held my head. He saw the briefcase. He saw that I was not a woman to be trifled with. "Keep it close," I said. "I will not be long." I walked through the revolving doors, and the familiar scent of the lobby hit me. Polished marble, expensive leather, and anxiety. This was the smell of high-stakes litigation. I walked past the security desk. The guard, an old man named Henry, who had been there for 20 years, looked up. His eyes widened. "Ms. Vance," he stammered, It has been years." 5 years, Henry I said, not breaking my stride. "I am back." I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the 45th floor. My ears popped as the car ascended. With every floor we passed, I felt a layer of Derek's influence shedding off me. The grocery lists, the school pickups, the silent dinners, where I listened to him brag about his genius. They all fell away. When the doors opened, I stepped out, not as a wife, but as a weapon. The reception area of Sterling and Partners was quiet. A young receptionist I did not recognize looked up from her computer. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. "Tell James that Elena is here," I said. Before she could reach for the phone, the double glass doors to the inner sanctum swung open. James Sterling stood there. He was 60 years old with silver hair and a suit that cost more than Derek's car. He looked exactly the same as the day I left. He did not look surprised. He looked like a general welcoming his best soldier back from the front lines. "Elena," he said. His voice was warm but serious. "James?" I replied. He stepped aside and gestured for me to enter. The entire office seemed to stop. Associates looked up from their cubicles. Partners stepped out of their offices. Whispers rippled through the room. They remembered. They remembered the Vance versus Pharma giant case. They remembered the woman who had never lost a patent dispute. James led me to the corner office, the one with the view of the harbor. My old office. It was exactly as I had left it. The mahogany desk was empty, waiting. I sat down in the leather chair. It groaned softly, a welcoming sound. I placed my hands on the desk. "I assume you have the files ready?" James asked, closing the door behind him. I tapped my briefcase. Everything. The original patent grant, the licensing agreement, and the proof of breach. James nodded. He walked over to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. "No champagne yet," he said, handing me a glass. "We celebrate when the body is buried." I took a sip. The water was cold and sharp. "I do not want to celebrate, James. I want to execute. Then let us get to work." I opened my laptop. It connected to the firm's secure server instantly. My old login still worked. James had kept me on the active roster for 5 years, hoping for this day. I opened a blank document. The cursor blinked a steady, rhythmic pulse. I began to type. "Notice of immediate termination of licensing agreement." The words flowed out of me effortlessly. My fingers danced across the keyboard. I did not need to look up precedents. I did not need to consult a thesaurus. The language of the law was my native tongue. I had been speaking the language of a housewife for too long, using words like laundry and dinner and yes, dear. Now I was speaking the language of power. Pursuant to Article 14, Section 3 of the Exclusive License Agreement dated October 12, 2019, between EV Holdings, LLC, hereafter referred to as licensor, and Novus Medtech, Inc., hereafter referred to as licensee, notice is hereby given of the immediate termination of all rights granted under said agreement. I typed with a cold fury. I detailed the breach. I did not mention the affair. I did not mention the heartbreak. The law did not care about broken hearts. It cared about broken contracts. I cited the breach of fiduciary duty. I cited the material misrepresentation of assets in the IPO prospectus. Derek had listed the patent as a company-owned asset in his filings to the SEC. That was a lie, a federal crime, and I was about to expose it. "This termination is effective immediately," I typed. "Licensee is hereby ordered to cease and desist all manufacturing, marketing, and sales of the neural graph technology. Licensee must immediately remove all references to the technology from its website and investor materials." I paused. I looked out the window at the city below. Somewhere down there in a glass tower, Derek was probably toasting with his bankers. He was probably laughing with Sienna, telling her how smart he was for getting rid of me. He thought he was the king of the world. He did not know that the ground beneath his feet was about to dissolve. I added the final blow. Copy to United States Securities and Exchange Commission Enforcement Division. Copy to NASDAQ Listing Qualifications Department. Copy to Goldman Sachs Investment Banking Division. I sat back. The document was done. It was 5 pages long. 5 pages that would destroy a billion-dollar valuation. James leaned over my shoulder, reading the screen. "It is brutal," he said quietly. "It is a masterpiece. I saved the file as a PDF." I opened my email client. I attached the document. I entered the email addresses. The board of directors, the lead underwriter, the SEC intake address, and finally, Derek Ross. I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand swept around the face. Tick, tick, tick. It was 1:59 in the afternoon. The markets were in full swing. Novus Medtech was the talk of the town. The IPO was oversubscribed. Everyone wanted a piece of the miracle technology. Sienna's voice echoed in my head. "You used to work in patent law, right? That is sweet. Yes, Sienna, it was sweet. It was very sweet. She thought patent law was about filing papers. She thought it was administrative work. She did not understand that patent law was the art of defining ownership. It was the art of drawing a line in the sand and saying, "This is mine, and you cannot touch it." She and Derek had crossed that line. They had trespassed on my property. They had treated my intellectual creation as their own personal piggy bank. They had forgotten the most important rule of business. Never build your house on land you do not own, especially if the landlord is the wife you are cheating on. I hovered the mouse cursor over the send button. My heart was calm. My hands were steady. I felt a strange sense of peace. This was not revenge. This was justice. This was balancing the scales. Derek wanted to be a single man with $1 billion. I was going to give him half of his wish. He would be a single man, but he would not have a dime. I looked at James. He nodded once. A silent permission to fire. I clicked the mouse. The email vanished from my outbox. Sent. 2 o'clock. I closed the laptop. The silence in the office was absolute. But I knew that across the city in boardrooms and trading floors, phones were starting to buzz, screens were lighting up, faces were turning pale. I imagined the scene in Derek's office. I imagined the notification popping up on his screen. I imagined him clicking on it, annoyed that someone was interrupting his victory lap. I imagined him reading the first line. I imagined the blood draining from his face. I imagined him trying to call me. I imagined him realizing that his phone was going straight to voicemail. I stood up and smoothed down my white suit. I walked over to the window and looked down at the city. Sienna was right about one thing, I said to the empty room, my voice reflecting off the glass. I do not understand the technical side of the graft. I cannot solder a circuit board. I turned to James, who was watching me with a look of immense pride. But she forgot one thing, I continued. A good lawyer does not need to know how to build the machine. She just needs to know where the off switch is. And I just pulled the plug. James smiled. "Welcome back, Elena," he said, raising his glass of water. I picked up my glass and clinked it against his. The sound rang out clear and sharp like a bell tolling for a funeral. "Now," I said, taking a sip, "we wait for the scream." The cork popped with a sharp, explosive sound that echoed off the glass walls of the executive suite. It was the sound of victory. It was the sound of $1 billion being born. Derek Ross laughed, a deep, rich sound that rumbled in his chest as he poured the golden liquid into 2 crystal flutes. The bubbles rose to the surface, fizzy and frantic, dancing with the same energy that was currently coursing through the veins of everyone at Novus Medtech. To us, Derek said, raising his glass, to the future, and to leaving the past exactly where it belongs, behind us. Sienna Vance giggled, clinking her glass against his. She was perched on the edge of his mahogany desk, her legs crossed at the knee, showing off a pair of shoes that cost more than most people's cars. She looked radiant. She looked like a woman who had bet on the winning horse and was about to collect the payout of a lifetime. To us, she purred, taking a sip. "And to your wife. Or should I say, your ex-wife-to-be. I almost feel bad for her, Derek. Almost. She is sitting in that big, empty house right now, probably clipping coupons while we are about to ring the bell on NASDAQ. It is tragic, really." Derek smirked, leaning back in his leather chair. He loosened his tie. "Do not waste your pity on her, Sienna." Elena chose her path. She chose to be a spectator. She had every opportunity to be part of this, but she just did not have the vision. She is safe. She is boring. And frankly, she is dead weight. He took a long swallow of the champagne. It tasted like success. It tasted like freedom. He looked out the window at the Boston skyline. The world was his. The IPO was scheduled for next Tuesday, but the private market trading the gray market where the real heavy hitters played was already valuing the stock at $80 a share. That put his personal stake at over $800 million. Life was perfect. And then his phone buzzed. It was not a call. It was an email notification. A single soft ping that cut through the silence of the office. Derek frowned. He had told his assistant to hold all calls. He wanted to enjoy this moment. He reached for the phone, intending to swipe the notification away and turn the device off. He looked at the screen. The subject line stopped him cold. Notice of immediate termination of license agreement. He blinked. He read it again. It did not make sense. It was like reading a sentence in a foreign language. License agreement, termination. He unlocked the phone. He tapped the email. He saw the sender. Elena Vance, EV Holdings, LLC. He let out a short, incredulous laugh. What is she doing? He muttered. Is this a joke? What is it? Babe Sienna asked, sliding off the desk and walking over to him. Is she begging for money already? Derek shook his head, a smirk returning to his lips. No. She is trying to be a lawyer again. She sent me some nonsense email about terminating the license. She thinks she can scare me. He scrolled down the email. His eyes scanned the legal jargon. Breach of fiduciary duty, material misrepresentation, immediate effect, cease and desist. His smirk began to fade. The legal language was not nonsense. It was precise. It was sharp. It was familiar. It sounded exactly like the Elena he had met in law school 10 years ago. The Elena who had top grades. The Elena who destroyed opponents in moot court. Suddenly, the glass door to his office flew open. There was no knock. There was no polite announcement. Frank Miller, the general counsel of Novus Medtech, burst into the room. Frank was a man who never sweated. He was a veteran of 3 mergers and a hostile takeover. He was a rock. But right now, Frank Miller looked like he was about to have a heart attack. His face was gray, his tie was askew, he was holding a tablet in his shaking hands. Derek Frank shouted, ignoring Sienna completely. Did you see it? Tell me you saw it. Saw what? Derek asked, standing up. A cold knot of unease started to form in his stomach. Elena sent some email. I am about to call her and tell her to stop playing games. Frank slammed the tablet onto the desk. It is not a game, Derek. She CC'd the SEC. She CC'd Goldman Sachs. She CC'd the board. So what? Derek snapped. Let her send emails. She is just a disgruntled wife. Frank looked at Derek with wide, terrified eyes. Derek, do you not understand? She revoked the license. Clause 14.3. I just read the original contract. I never checked it because you told me you owned the IP. You told me Novus owned the patent. I do own it. Derek yelled, his voice rising. I am her husband. What is hers is mine. That is not how intellectual property works, you idiot! Frank screamed back, losing all professional composure. She owns the holding company. She granted us a license, a revocable license, and she just revoked it. The room went silent. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning. And then the sounds began. First, it was Sienna's phone. It started buzzing on the desk. Then it pinged. Then it buzzed again. A cascade of notifications. Sienna picked it up. Her face went pale. Derek, she whispered. It is the broker, the gray market, the stock. What about it? Derek demanded. It is crashing, she said, her voice trembling. The buy orders are disappearing. Someone leaked the termination notice to the trading floor. They are saying, oh my God, they are saying the company is a shell. They are saying we have no product. Derek grabbed his remote and turned on the Bloomberg terminal on the wall. The screen flickered to life. There it was. The ticker for Novus Medtech. It was a vertical red line, $80, 75, 60, 40. It was free falling. It was not a correction. It was a massacre. The phone on Derek's desk began to ring. It was the red line, the direct line from the board of directors. Derek stared at it. He could not move. He felt like he was in a nightmare. This could not be happening. Not now. Not today. Answer it, Frank hissed. Derek picked up the receiver. His hand was slippery with sweat. Hello? He croaked. Derek, this is Marcus from the board. The voice on the other end was ice cold. We just received a document from a Mrs. Elena Vance. Is it true? Marcus, listen, it is just a misunderstanding. Derek stammered. We are going through a rough patch personally. She is just lashing out. I will fix it. Is it true? Marcus roared. Does she hold the patent rights? Does she have the power to terminate? Technically, yes, but there is no but. Derek, you committed securities fraud. You listed that patent as a company asset. If that license is gone, we have nothing. We have a lawsuit. Goldman just pulled the underwriting. The IPO is dead. The word hung in the air. Fix this, Derek. Marcus said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. Fix this right now, or you will not just be fired. You will be going to federal prison. The line went dead. Derek dropped the receiver. He looked up. Sienna was backing away from him. She was looking at him with horror. Not concern. Horror. She was looking at a man who had just turned radioactive. Where are you going? Derek asked. I have to make a call. Sienna stammered. I need to call my broker. I took a loan against my options, Derek. If the stock goes to zero, I am bankrupt. She turned and ran out of the office. She did not look back. Derek was alone with Frank. Call her, Frank said, rubbing his temples. Call your wife. Beg her. Offer her anything. Half the company. All the company. Just get her to rescind that notice. Derek grabbed his cell phone. His fingers were shaking so hard he could barely unlock the screen. He found her name, Elena. He pressed call. It rang. Once, twice, 3 times, straight to voicemail. He redialed. Elena, pick up, he shouted into the phone. Pick up the damn phone, voicemail again. He called again, and again, and again. 10 times, 20 times, 30 times. He paced the office like a caged animal. He loosened his tie until it hung off his neck. He was sweating through his expensive shirt. Pick up, pick up, pick up. He threw a glass vase against the wall. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. Meanwhile, across the city in the serene quiet of the Mandarin Oriental Spa, Elena Vance lay on a massage table. The room smelled of lavender and eucalyptus. Soft instrumental music played in the background, masking the chaos of the world outside. Her phone lay on the side table face down. It was on silent mode. The screen lit up. Missed call Derek. Missed call Derek. Missed call Derek. 50 missed calls. The massage therapist, a woman with strong hands and a soft voice, leaned in. Is the pressure okay, Mrs. Vance? She asked. Elena smiled. Her eyes were closed. She took a deep breath, inhaling the peace. It is perfect, she whispered. Absolutely perfect. She did not reach for the phone. She did not worry about the man who was currently watching his life burn to ashes. She just lay there and let the tension of 5 years melt away. She imagined Derek in his office. She imagined the sweat. She imagined the terror. She imagined him realizing that the woman he called dead weight was actually the anchor, and he had just cut the chain. Back in the office, Derek sank to his knees. The Bloomberg screen showed the stock at $5. It was over. The company was worthless. He looked at the phone in his hand. It was a brick, a useless piece of glass and metal. Elena, he whispered, his voice breaking. What have you done? But there was no answer. Only the red numbers on the screen and the silence of a room where the party had ended before it even began. The sun had begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the living room of our sprawling estate. It was the golden hour, that time of day Derek used to love, because it made the house look like something out of a magazine spread. I sat in the high-backed velvet armchair facing the entryway. On the low table in front of me sat a delicate porcelain cup filled with Earl Grey tea. I lifted it to my lips, blowing softly on the steam. My hands were perfectly steady. The house was silent. It was a heavy, expectant silence, like the air before a thunderstorm. I knew he was coming. I had tracked the GPS on his car. He was moving at 80 miles per hour down the interstate, weaving through traffic, breaking every speed limit law in the state of Massachusetts. I checked my watch. 5:45. He would be here in 3 minutes. I looked around the room. This room had been my prison for the last 5 years. I had decorated it according to his tastes: beige walls, minimalist furniture, art that looked expensive but meant nothing. It was a stage set for the perfect life of a successful CEO and his dutiful, invisible wife. Today, that stage was set for a different kind of performance. Today, it was a courtroom, and the defendant was running late. I heard the roar of the engine first. The Porsche 911 GT 3RS, a car he had bought 2 months ago to celebrate the upcoming IPO. A car bought with credit based on a valuation that no longer existed. The engine screamed as he turned onto our street. Then came the screech of tires on asphalt, followed by the crunch of gravel as he skidded into the driveway. He did not park. He abandoned the vehicle. I heard the car door slam with enough force to shake the window panes. Heavy footsteps pounded up the front steps. He did not use his key. He did not ring the bell. The front door exploded open. The lock splintered with a sickening crack of wood and metal. The door banged against the interior wall, leaving a dent in the plaster. Derek stood in the doorway. He looked like a madman. His $5,000 suit was rumpled, his tie was pulled loose and hanging sideways, and his hair was wild. His face was a mask of purple rage sweat dripping down his temples. He was breathing hard, his chest heaving like a bull that had been stabbed. He scanned the room, his eyes wild and unfocused, until they landed on me. I took a sip of tea. I did not stand up. I did not flinch. I simply watched him over the rim of my cup. "Elena," he roared. The sound was guttural, raw. "Hello, Derek," I said. My voice was calm, conversational. "You are home early. Dinner is not ready. I am afraid." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, kicking over a vase of fresh lilies as he came. Water and flowers spilled across the hardwood floor, but he did not notice. He stopped in front of me, looming over my chair, trying to use his height to intimidate me. It was a tactic he used in boardrooms. He thought physically dominating a space made him right. "Fix it!" he screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "Pick up the phone and fix it right now. Rescind the notice. Tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you were hacked. I do not care what you tell them. Just fix it." I set my teacup down on the saucer with a gentle clink. "I cannot do that, Derek," I said. "The termination is irrevocable. It is already filed with the SEC. It is public record now." "You bitch," he hissed. The veins in his neck bulged. "Do you have any idea what you have done? Do you have any concept of the scale of this? You have destroyed everything. The stock is at zero, Elena. Zero. My options are worthless. The investors are calling for my head. I am going to be investigated for fraud. I know I said. I warned you, Derek. Actually, the contract warned you. Section 14. You should have read it." He laughed a manic, terrifying sound. "Read it," he mocked. "You think this is about reading a contract? This is about real life, Elena. This is about power. This is about money. You are playing with fire, and you are going to get burned. You think you can just destroy a billion-dollar company because your feelings are hurt, because I didn't say thank you at a party. You are pathetic. It is not about feelings." "Derek," I said, meeting his gaze evenly. "It is about theft. You tried to steal my property. You tried to defraud me. You conspired with your lawyer to leave me with nothing after I built the foundation of your success. I built this," he screamed, striking his chest with his fist. "I built Novus. I hired the sales team. I raised the capital. I did the road shows. Me, not you. You just sat at home and played with your little legal documents. You are nothing. You are a background character in my story." He was unraveling. The narcissism that had sustained him for years was cracking under the pressure of reality. He could not accept that the power had never been his. "You are a thief," he continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are a thief and a saboteur. But you are going to fix this. Because if you do not, I swear to God, Elena, I will make you regret the day you were born." I looked at him. I saw the violence in his eyes. It had always been there, lurking beneath the surface, hidden behind the charm and the expensive suits. Now that the money was gone, the monster was visible. "I am not fixing anything, Derek," I said. "The license is gone, the company is dead, and you are trespassing in my house. I suggest you leave." "Trespassing?" He laughed. "This is my house. I paid for this house." "Actually," I said, enjoying the moment, "you paid the mortgage from the company account. Since the company was operating on an illegal basis, using stolen intellectual property, the forensic accountants will likely seize this asset. But technically, the deed is in my name, so yes, you are trespassing." That was the breaking point. Something inside him snapped. The logic failed. The ego took over. He let out a roar of pure, animalistic rage. "You ungrateful, useless bitch!" He raised his hand. His palm was open, his fingers rigid. He swung his arm back, aiming for my face. It was a blow meant to hurt, meant to silence, meant to put me back in my place. I did not flinch. I did not close my eyes. I did not raise my hands to protect myself. I just watched. Because I knew he would never make contact. Just as his arm began its forward arc, a shadow detached itself from the hallway. A hand, large and gloved in black leather, shot out and grabbed Derek's wrist mid-air. The sound of the impact was dull and heavy, bone hitting muscle. Derek gasped. His momentum halted instantly. He looked up confused. Standing behind him was a man who looked like a mountain carved out of granite. He was 6 feet 4 inches tall, wearing a black tactical suit. His name was Marcus, and he was the head of the private security detail that James Sterling retained for his most high-risk clients. Behind Marcus, 2 more men stepped out from the kitchen. They moved silently, efficiently, forming a perimeter around my chair. Derek struggled, trying to yank his arm free, but Marcus held him with a grip of iron. "Let go of me!" Derek shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "Who are you? What is this?" Marcus did not answer. He simply twisted Derek's arm behind his back, forcing him to bend over in pain. He pushed him away from me, creating a safe distance. I picked up my teacup again and took a sip. "I told you, Derek," I said, my voice cool and detached. "I am not the woman you think I am. Did you really think I would trigger a corporate apocalypse and then sit here unprotected, waiting for you to come and beat me? I know you. I know that when you lose control, you get violent. I anticipated this moment just like I anticipated your fraud." Derek was panting heavily, his face pressed against the carpet as Marcus held him down. He looked up at me from the floor, his eyes wide with shock. He had never seen me like this. He had never seen me wield power. You hired mercenaries," he sputtered. "Security consultants," I corrected. "And they are very expensive. Fortunately, I can afford them. Because unlike you, I still have my assets." Derek struggled against the weight of the bodyguard on his back. "You are insane," he spat out. "You are completely insane. You are burning down everything we built. You are destroying my legacy." Legacy. I repeated the word, tasting the bitterness of it. "Your legacy is a lie, Derek. It was always a lie." I stood up then. I placed the cup on the table and smoothed down the front of my white suit. I walked over to where he lay, pinned on the floor. I looked down at him. The man I had loved, the man I had supported, the man who had thanked his dog instead of his wife. "You said something interesting earlier, Derek," I said. "You said I was burning money." Derek glared up at me. You are burning $200 million. That is the valuation of the patent portfolio. You are throwing it into the fire just to spite me. You are a stupid, emotional housewife who does not understand business. You are destroying value because you are jealous." I shook my head slowly. A small, pitying smile played on my lips. "That is where you are wrong, Derek. I am not burning money. I am recalling it." I crouched down so my face was level with his. I wanted him to see my eyes. I wanted him to see the absolute clarity in them. "I am not destroying the value," I continued. "I am simply taking it back from a licensee who breached the contract. The patent still exists. The technology still works. The value is not in Novus MedTech. The value is in the invention. And the invention belongs to me." Derek laughed a wet, desperate sound. "The invention," he scoffed. "You mean the invention I created, the invention I dreamed up. You just wrote the legal paperwork, Elena. You are a glorified secretary. You fixed the grammar. You filed the forms. But the genius, the spark that was me, Sienna, was right. You do not understand the science. You are just a lawyer." I felt a cold flash of anger, but I suppressed it. This was the moment, the final nail in the coffin of his ego. "Sienna said, I do not understand the technical side," I said softly. "And you believe that. You believe that you are the sole inventor." I stood up and walked to the briefcase I had left on the side table. I opened it and pulled out the thick binder. The master file. I walked back to Derek. "Let me educate you on something." "Derek," I said, opening the binder. Do you remember the night the prototype failed? The night the synaptic bridge kept shorting out? You were crying in the kitchen. You wanted to quit. You said the biology was impossible. Derek went still. He remembered. I saw it in his eyes. I remember I continued. I remember looking at your schematics. You were trying to bridge the neurons using a linear electrical pulse. It was too crude. It was frying the tissue. I told you that you needed a non-linear decay algorithm to mimic the natural firing rate of the brainstem. Derek's eyes widened. That was me, I said. I sketched the algorithm on a napkin. You did not even understand the math at first. I had to explain the calculus to you. I had to write the code that controlled the pulse. I flipped the binder open to page 45. And then there was the claims section, I said. The part of the patent that actually defines the invention. The part that legally determines who owns the idea. I held the page down in front of his face. Read it, Derek, I commanded. Read the inventorship declaration. He stared at the paper. He tried to look away, but he couldn't. Inventors listed, he read, his voice a hoarse whisper. Primary inventor, Elena Vance. Co-inventor, Derek Ross. You see, I said, closing the binder with a snap. Sienna thinks I do not understand the technical side. You think I am just a housewife. But the United States Patent Office knows the truth. I did not just write the legal protection, Derek. I wrote the algorithm. I solved the decay problem. I invented the core mechanism that makes the neural graft work. I stood up to my full height, looking down at him like a queen looking at a peasant. You were the face, I said. You were the salesman. And you were good at it. I was happy to let you have the glory. I was happy to stay in the shadows and let you pretend you were the genius. Because I loved you. And because I thought we were a team. But you forgot who did the homework. Derek lay there limp. The fight had gone out of him. The revelation had crushed him more than the bankruptcy ever could. He realized that his entire identity, his entire self-image as a brilliant innovator, was a fabrication supported by his wife's silent labor. Get him out of here, I said to Marcus. Marcus hauled Derek to his feet. Derek did not resist. He hung in the bodyguard's grip like a rag doll. He looked at me one last time. His eyes were empty. Elena, he whispered, please. I turned my back on him. Get him out, I repeated. And Marcus, tell the police that Mr. Ross was trespassing and attempted to assault a homeowner. I want a restraining order filed by morning. Yes, ma'am, Marcus said. They dragged him out. I heard his shoes dragging against the floor. I heard the front door open. I heard the cool night air rush in. Then I heard the police sirens in the distance. They were coming for him, not just for the assault, but for the securities fraud. The SEC moved fast when $1 billion vanished into thin air. I walked over to the broken door and looked out into the darkness. I watched as the private security team handed my husband over to the arriving police officers. I saw the flashing blue and red lights illuminating his face. He looked small. He looked ordinary. I closed the door as best as I could. I walked back to my chair. The tea was cold now. I picked up the phone. I had one more call to make. Hello, came the voice on the other end. It was the chairman of the board of Novus MedTech. Hello, Marcus, I said. This is Elena Vance. Mrs. Vance, Marcus sounded terrified. We received your notice. We are... Save it, Marcus, I cut him off. The company is finished. Derek is in police custody. But I have a proposition for you. A proposition, he asked. I own the patent, I said. I own the algorithm. And I am the only person on earth who understands how it actually works. If you want to save your investment, if you want to save the technology, you are going to have to deal with me. What do you want? Marcus asked. I want the chair, I said. I want Derek's shares clawed back and canceled. I want Sienna Vance fired for cause. And I want the company renamed to what Marcus asked. Vance Innovations, I said. There was a long pause. Then Marcus spoke. When can you come in? Tomorrow morning at 9, I said. Have the board ready. I hung up the phone. I sat alone in the quiet house. I was not a housewife anymore. I was not a lawyer anymore. I was the CEO. And tomorrow I was going to show the world exactly what a woman who understands the technical side can do. While Derek was being shoved into the back of a police cruiser outside my home across the city, the second half of my revenge was unfolding in the corner office of Novus MedTech. I did not need to be there to witness it. The reports I received later from the board of directors and the security logs painted a picture so vivid I could see it in my mind's eye. It was a scene of desperation, greed, and the absolute collapse of a facade. Sienna Vance, the woman who had sneered at me in the bathroom, the woman who had claimed she understood the industry, was about to learn a very harsh lesson in corporate accountability. According to the timestamps on the security cameras, Sienna had returned to the office after fleeing the celebration. She was not there to work. She was there to salvage what she could. The office was in chaos. Junior employees were packing boxes, crying into their phones as news of the license termination hit the internet. The stock, which had been trading on the gray market at $80, was now suspended. The valuation of the company had effectively dropped to the cash value of the office furniture. Sienna was in Derek's office. She was frantically shoving documents into a shredder. Her hair was messy, her eyes wide with panic. She was on the phone screaming at her broker. "What do you mean, margin call?" she shrieked, her voice echoing through the glass walls. "I cannot cover a margin call. The stock is going to bounce back. It has to bounce back. Derek promised me." She paused, listening to the voice on the other end. "Liquidate," she gasped. "You cannot liquidate my portfolio. That is everything. That is my condo. That is my car. You cannot take my car." She slammed the phone down. She looked around the office, breathing hard. She needed money. She needed liquid assets. She started opening Derek's desk drawers, rifling through them. She was looking for cash, for company credit cards, for anything she could grab before the ship went down completely. She found a corporate black card. Her eyes lit up. She grabbed her bag and turned to leave. But the door was blocked. Marcus, the chairman of the board, stood in the doorway. Behind him were two members of the legal compliance team and a security guard. Marcus looked tired. He looked like a man who had just watched $1 billion evaporate, and he was looking for someone to blame. "Going somewhere, Sienna?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Sienna froze. She clutched her bag to her chest, trying to hide the credit card. She composed her face, forcing a smile that looked brittle and fake. "Marcus," she said, her voice pitching up an octave, "thank God you are here. It is chaos. I was just trying to secure some sensitive files. Derek has gone crazy. He lied to us, Marcus. He lied to all of us." She stepped forward, playing the victim card with the skill of a seasoned actress. "Can you believe it?" she continued, shaking her head. "He told me he owned the patent. He told me everything was legal. I feel so betrayed. I have dedicated my life to this company, and to find out that he was a fraud. It is just heartbreaking. We need to issue a statement condemning him immediately. I can help draft it. I can be the face of the recovery." Marcus did not move. He did not smile. He looked at her with a mixture of disgust and disbelief. "The face of the recovery," he repeated flatly. "Yes," Sienna said, gaining confidence. "The investors love me. I can smooth this over. We can say that Derek duped us, that he was a rogue operator. I can step in as interim CEO. I know the sales pipeline better than anyone." Marcus laughed. It was a dry, humorless bark of a laugh. "You want to be CEO?" he asked. "You think you are the victim here." "I am a victim," Sienna insisted, tears welling up in her eyes on cue. "He used me, Marcus. He promised me a future, and he built it on lies." Marcus stepped into the room, forcing Sienna to back up against the desk. "Let us talk about lies, Sienna," he said. "You are the vice president of sales. That is a senior executive position. Your compensation package was $300,000 a year, plus significant stock options." "I earned every penny," Sienna said defensively. "Did you?" Marcus asked. "Part of your job description implies a fiduciary duty to the company. It implies that when you sell a product, you understand what you are selling. You sold $50 million worth of pre-orders for the neural graft. You stood in front of hospitals and insurers and told them we had the exclusive rights to this technology, because Derek told me we did." Sienna cried. "You are an executive," Marcus roared, making her flinch. "You are not a secretary. You are not an intern. It is your job to perform due diligence. Did you ever once ask to see the patent filings? Did you ever once check the chain of title? Did you ever once read the licensing agreement that was sitting in the company server?" Sienna stammered. That is legal's job. That is not my job. I am in sales. It is the job of every officer of this corporation to ensure we are not committing fraud, Marcus said. You were sleeping with the CEO, Sienna. Everyone knew it. You had more access to him than anyone. You mocked his wife for being a housewife, yet that housewife was the only person in this entire mess who actually understood the business. Sienna's face twisted. Do not talk about her. She spat the mask of the victim slipping. She is just a jealous, bitter woman who is trying to ruin us because Derek stopped loving her. She is a vindictive little... She is the owner of the technology Marcus cut her off, and she just offered us a lifeline that involves cleaning house. Sienna went pale. What do you mean? We are restructuring, Marcus said. We are trying to salvage the company to avoid total bankruptcy, but there are conditions. What conditions? Sienna whispered. Marcus looked at the legal officer next to him. The officer stepped forward and handed Sienna a single sheet of paper. Sienna Vance, Marcus said formally, you are hereby terminated from your position as Vice President of Sales effective immediately. Terminated. Sienna gasped. You cannot terminate me? I have a contract. I have a golden parachute. If you fire me without cause, you owe me 2 years of severance. This is not without cause, Marcus said, his voice cold as ice. This is termination for cause. Specifically, gross negligence, failure to perform due diligence, and conduct detrimental to the reputation of the company. He pointed to the paper. You failed to verify the company's primary asset. You participated in a roadshow selling a product we did not own. That is not just incompetence, Sienna. That is actionable negligence. Sienna stared at the paper. Her hands were shaking. No severance, she whispered. But I have debts. I have the condo. I have the loans. That is not our problem, Marcus said. In fact, our lawyers are currently reviewing your expense accounts. If we find that you used company funds for personal trips with Derek, and I suspect we will be suing you for restitution. Sienna dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, landing on the expensive Persian rug she had picked out a month ago. This is her doing, isn't it? She hissed. Elena. She told you to do this. Elena Vance is the only reason this building is not being boarded up by the marshals right now, Marcus said. She is a brilliant woman, and she made it very clear that she will not do business with a company that employs incompetent executives. Sienna's face turned red. The beautiful, composed woman was gone. In her place was a cornered animal. He is a fraud! She screamed, suddenly losing all control. Derek is a fraud and she is a witch. They deserve each other. I am the talent here. I am the one who brought in the money. You cannot fire me. I will sue you. I will go to the press. I will tell everyone that you knew. You will do nothing, Marcus said calmly. Because if you do, I will make sure the SEC investigation includes your name as a co-conspirator. You signed the prospectus too, Sienna. You signed the sales projections. If you want to go to prison along with your boyfriend, keep talking. Sienna closed her mouth. The threat of prison was real. She knew it. Get your things, Marcus said. You have 5 minutes. Security will escort you out. Sienna looked around the office. She looked at the desk where she and Derek had toasted their success just hours ago. She looked at the empty champagne glasses. It was all gone. The money, the status, the power. She grabbed her bag. She tried to walk out with her head held high, but her legs were shaky. Wait, Marcus said. Sienna stopped, hoping for a reprieve. The card, Marcus said, holding out his hand. Sienna looked at him. She reached into her bag and pulled out the black company credit card. She threw it at him. It clattered onto the floor. I hope you all rot, she spat. She walked out of the office. But the humiliation was not over. As she walked through the open plan office, the employees who were packing up their desks stopped to watch her. These were people who had lost their jobs because of the disaster she helped create. They did not look at her with admiration anymore. They looked at her with hatred. Cowards, someone muttered. Fraud, another voice said. Sienna kept walking, her eyes fixed on the elevator doors. She pressed the button frantically. When the doors opened, she practically ran inside. As she descended to the lobby, she pulled out her phone. She needed to call someone. Anyone. A recruiter. A friend. She called a headhunter she had worked with in the past. Hey, it is Sienna, she said, trying to sound casual. Look, I am thinking of making a move. Novus is... Well, it is a mess. I am available immediately. There was a long pause on the other end. Sienna the recruiter said, his voice cold. I just saw the news. The SEC is involved. The license was revoked. Yeah, it is a technicality, Sienna said quickly. But my sales numbers were... Sienna the recruiter cut her off. You sold vaporware. You are toxic. No biotech firm in Boston will touch you. I cannot represent you. Do not call me again. The line went dead. Sienna stared at the phone. Blacklisted. She was blacklisted. The elevator doors opened into the lobby. She walked out. The security guard at the front desk, the one she usually ignored, asked for her badge. I need your access card, Ms. Vance, he said. Sienna handed it over. It felt like handing over her identity. She walked out the revolving doors onto the street. It was raining now, a cold, miserable Boston drizzle. She did not have an umbrella. She stood on the sidewalk shivering in her expensive red dress. She looked for her car. Then she remembered. The valet service had been suspended on Marcus's orders. Her car was locked in the underground garage and she had no access card to get to it. She was stranded. She took out her phone again. She looked at Derek's contact, the man she had called her soulmate yesterday, the man she had planned to travel the world with. She typed a message. You ruined my life. You are a loser and a liar. I hope you rot in jail. I never loved you. I only loved the money. And now you do not even have that. She hit send. It was petty. It was cruel. But it was the only weapon she had left. She stood there in the rain waiting for an Uber that she would have to pay for with her personal credit card, which she knew was close to its limit. She realized then that Elena was right. She did not understand ownership. She had borrowed a life. She had borrowed a man. She had borrowed a reputation. And now the true owner had come to collect, and Sienna was left with nothing but a wet silk dress and a future that looked as gray as the sky above her. Across town in the quiet luxury of my home, I received a text from Marcus. It is done. Sienna is gone. The board accepts your terms. We are ready for the transition. I put down my phone and looked at the empty chair where Derek used to sit. The silence in the house wasn't lonely anymore. It was peaceful. It was clean. The trash had been taken out. Both pieces of it. I stood up and turned off the lights. I had a big day tomorrow. I had a company to run. And for the first time in 5 years, I was going to sleep soundly knowing that everything I owned was exactly where it belonged. In my hands. The air in the boardroom on the 40th floor of the Novus MedTech Tower was thick enough to choke on. It smelled of stale coffee, nervous sweat, and the ozone scent of overheated electronics. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the Boston skyline gleamed under the morning sun, indifferent to the catastrophe unfolding inside. Inside, 12 men in expensive suits were shouting over each other, their faces flushed with the kind of primal panic that only hits the ultra-wealthy when they realize they are about to become significantly less wealthy. Marcus, the chairman of the board, sat at the head of the massive mahogany table. He looked 10 years older than he had yesterday. His tie was loosened, his hair was a mess, and he was massaging his temples, as if trying to push his brain back inside his skull. On the screens embedded in the wall, the news loop was relentless. Financial networks were already calling it the scandal of the decade. The ticker for Novus MedTech was frozen a gray tombstone marking where $1 billion used to be. We need to distance ourselves, one board member shouted, slamming his fist on the table. We need to issue a press release stating that we were deceived by the CEO. We need to file a civil suit against Derek Ross for fraud and breach of contract before the DOJ indicts us all as co-conspirators. Sue him for what another member argued, his voice shrill. He has no assets. His house is likely leveraged. His stock is worthless. If we sue him, we are just picking the bones of a corpse. We need to liquidate. We need to sell the office furniture and the servers and try to pay back the bridge loan before the bank seizes our personal assets. It is over, Marcus groaned. The technology is gone. The license is terminated. We have a shell company with $40 million in debt and no product. We are not just bankrupt gentlemen. We are ruined. The room descended into chaos again. Men were pacing. Men were cursing into their phones. Men were staring blankly at the table, wondering how they would explain this to their wives. They were titans of industry reduced to frightened children because they had bet on a horse that turned out to be a donkey. I stood outside the heavy double doors, listening to the muffled roar of their fear. I adjusted the lapel of my white suit. It was a stark contrast to the funeral attire inside. White was the color of mourning in some cultures, but today it was the color of cleansing. It was the color of a blank page. I nodded to the security guard. He was new, a replacement for the team that had been loyal to Derek. He looked at me with respect bordering on awe. He opened the door. I walked in. I did not rush. I did not hesitate. I walked with the rhythmic click of my heels against the marble floor, cutting through the cacophony of male voices like a knife. The room went silent. One by one, the heads turned. They looked at me. First with confusion, then with recognition, and finally with a strange mixture of hope and hostility. Mrs. Ross Marcus said, standing up slowly, "This is a closed meeting of the Board of Directors. You have no business here. We are currently discussing the legal action against your husband." I stopped at the opposite end of the long table facing him. The distance between us felt like a battlefield. "I am not here as Mrs. Ross," I said, my voice cool and projected clearly to every corner of the room. "I am not here to defend my husband. I am not here to beg for mercy. And I am certainly not here to offer condolences." I walked forward, placing my briefcase on the table. The sound of the leather hitting the wood was the only sound in the room. "I am here as the owner of the intellectual property that this company was built on," I continued. "I am here as your largest creditor, and I am here to offer you the only lifeline you are going to get." A murmur went through the room. One of the investors, a man named Distinctive for his bow tie, leaned forward. "The license is terminated, Mrs. Ross," he said. "You killed the company yesterday. What is there to talk about?" "I killed the parasite," I corrected him. "The host is still alive if you have the stomach to save it." I opened my briefcase. I pulled out a stack of files. I did not hand them out. I slid them down the center of the table. They fanned out perfectly, a display of dominance. "These are the technical specifications for the neural graft," I said. "Not the marketing fluff Derek showed you. The real engineering data, the clinical trial results, the decay algorithms, the proof that the technology works." I paused, letting them look at the papers. "And this," I said, pulling out a single sheet of document, "is a draft of a new licensing agreement." The room shifted. The energy changed from despair to hunger. They were sharks, and I had just dropped a bucket of chum in the water. Marcus picked up the draft. His hands were shaking slightly. "What is this?" he asked. "It is a proposal," I said. "But before you get excited, let me make the situation perfectly clear. You are currently staring into the abyss. The SEC is drafting subpoenas. The investors are preparing class action lawsuits. Derek Ross is currently sitting in a holding cell, and by the end of the day, he will be charged with securities fraud. If you continue on your current path, you will spend the next 5 years in court, and you will lose every penny you invested." I looked around the room, making eye contact with every single man. "That is option 1, I said. You sue Derek. You liquidate. You go home and tell your families you lost everything because you failed to do due diligence on a CEO who was more interested in his mistress than his product." I let the silence hang there. I let them taste the bitterness of that future. Or, I said, my voice dropping an octave softer but heavier, "You take option 2. "What is option 2? The man in the bow tie asked, his voice eager. "Option 2 is a restructuring," I said. "You claw back every single share of stock issued to Derek Ross. You cancel his options. You fire him for cause effective immediately. You issue a statement cooperating fully with the SEC investigation, placing the blame entirely on his fraudulent misconduct." "We were already planning to do that," Marcus said. "But without the license." "If you do that," I interrupted him, "and if you agree to my terms, I will reinstate the license." The air in the room seemed to vibrate. Reinstating the license meant the product was real again. It meant the IPO could be salvaged eventually. It meant they might not lose their fortunes. What terms? Marcus asked, his eyes narrowing. I walked to the head of the table. Marcus looked at me, then he looked at the chair. He hesitated for a second before stepping aside. It was a symbolic surrender. I did not sit down. I stood behind the chair, gripping the leather back. First, I said, the company name changes. Novus Medtech is tainted. It is associated with Derek Ross. The new entity will be called Vance Innovations. Done, Marcus said quickly. That is easy. What else? Second, I continued, the royalty structure changes. I previously granted the license for $1 a year. That was a charity rate for my husband. The new rate is 5% of gross revenue. A gasp went around the room. 5% was high. It was aggressive. That is steep, Mrs. Ross, one board member protested. That cuts into our margins significantly. It is the price of survival, I said coldly. You can have 95% of something or 100% of nothing. Choose. The board member shut his mouth. He knew I was right. And third, I said, and this is non-negotiable. I looked at Marcus. I looked at the empty seat where Derek used to sit. I want the CEO position. The room erupted. You, Marcus sputtered. Mrs. Ross, with all due respect, you are a lawyer. You are, well, you have been a housewife for 5 years. You have no management experience. You cannot run a biotech company. The market will eat you alive. I laughed. It was a sharp, icy sound that silenced them immediately. Management experience, I repeated. You mean the experience Derek had, the experience of drinking champagne and sleeping with his vice president of sales while his wife did the actual work. I leaned forward, placing my hands flat on the table. Let me tell you what I have been doing for the last 5 years, gentlemen. I have been managing the most volatile asset on the planet, a narcissist with a God complex. I managed his schedule. I managed his legal compliance. I managed his ego. I wrote the patent that you are all desperate to get your hands on. I wrote the code that makes the device work. I know every bolt, every wire, and every line of text in this company. I pointed at the screen where the stock chart was still flatlining. You trusted a man because he looked the part, I said. He had the suit. He had the jawline. He had the arrogance. And he drove this company off a cliff. Maybe it is time you trusted the person who actually built the engine. I stood up straight, adjusting my white jacket. Sienna Vance told me yesterday that I did not understand the technical side. I think I have proven that I understand the technical side, the legal side, and the business side better than anyone in this room. I looked at my watch. I have a meeting with the SEC investigators in 1 hour. I intend to walk into that meeting with a plan to save this company and protect the shareholders. I can go in there as the new CEO of Vance Innovations with a reinstated license and a clear path forward. Or I can go in there as a hostile witness and hand them the emails where you all signed off on Derek's fraudulent projections. I picked up my briefcase. You have 5 minutes to decide. I turned my back on them and walked towards the window. I looked out at the city. My heart was pounding, but not from fear. It was the thrill of the kill. I had them. I knew I had them. They were greedy men, and greedy men always choose the money. Behind me, I heard the furious whispering. I heard the scraping of chairs. I heard Marcus's voice low and urgent. She is right. She holds the cards. The tech is hers. If she walks, we are dead. She is tough. Did you see how she handled us? She might actually be able to pull this off. 5% is robbery, but it is better than bankruptcy. Do it. Vote. I waited. I counted the seconds. 1, 2, 3. Mrs. Ross Marcus's voice came from behind me. I turned around. The 12 men were standing. They looked at me not with the dismissal they had shown when I entered, but with a new expression. Fear mixed with respect. They realized that the white suit was not a costume. It was a uniform. We have taken a vote, Marcus said. It was unanimous. He gestured to the empty chair at the head of the table. We accept your terms. We will begin the paperwork to remove Derek immediately. The clawback provisions will be activated. And... He paused, swallowing his pride. And we would like to welcome you as the interim CEO of Vance Innovations. I did not smile. I did not celebrate. I simply walked to the head of the table. I sat down in the leather chair. It was still warm from where Marcus had been sitting. It felt right. It felt like it had been waiting for me. Interim, I said, looking at Marcus. Marcus blinked. Permanent. He corrected himself quickly. Permanent CEO. Good, I said. I picked up the gavel that sat on the table. It was heavy, solid. Let's get to work, I said. First order of business. I want a forensic audit of the sales department. And someone get the maintenance crew up here. I want the name on the building changed by tomorrow morning. I brought the gavel down. Bang. The sound echoed through the room like a gunshot. The old regime was dead. The reign of the housewife had begun. And as I looked at the faces of the men around the table, I knew one thing for certain. They would never underestimate me again. The conference room at the district attorney's office was windowless and smelled of lemon polish and stale fear. It was a stark contrast to the plush boardrooms Derek was used to. There were no panoramic views of the harbor here. There were no crystal carafes of water. There was only a scratched metal table bolting to the floor and the humming of a fluorescent light that flickered intermittently. I sat on one side of the table, flanked by James Sterling and the lead prosecutor. Derek sat on the other side next to a public defender. His expensive legal team had quit the moment the retainer check bounced. Derek looked like a ghost. He had not shaved in 3 days. His eyes were red-rimmed and sunken. He was wearing a gray tracksuit that hung loosely on his frame because the police had seized his bespoke suits as part of the asset forfeiture. He did not look at me. He stared at the document in front of him. It was the plea deal and asset surrender agreement. Sign it, Derek, James said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. It is the only way you walk out of here today. Derek's hand shook as he held the cheap ballpoint pen. The terms were brutal but necessary. In exchange for a suspended sentence and avoiding 5 years in federal prison for securities fraud, Derek had to agree to full cooperation. He had to admit to the fraud. And most importantly, he had to sign over every single asset he had. His shares in the company, his options, his 401k, the house, the cars, even the watch on his wrist. He was trading his fortune for his freedom. I have nothing left, Derek whispered, his voice cracking. If I sign this, I am destitute. Elena, please, you cannot do this. Let me keep the apartment. Just the small apartment in Seaport. I need a place to live. I leaned forward. The movement made him flinch. You have a place to live, Derek, I said. I hear your mother has a very comfortable couch in her basement in Ohio, or you can get a job and rent a place like a normal person. But I am Derek Ross, he stammered. I was the CEO of Novus. You were a fraud, Derek, I corrected him. You were a fraud who stole from his wife and lied to the world. And now you are just a defendant. Sign the paper. He looked at the prosecutor. The prosecutor nodded grimly, pointing to the door where the marshals were waiting to take him to holding if he refused. Derek let out a sob, a broken, pathetic sound. He pressed the pen to the paper. I watched the ink flow. I watched him sign his name. With every loop of the letters, I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. He was signing away my past. He was signing away the last 5 years of my pain. When he finished, he dropped the pen. Done, James said, snatching the papers away before Derek could change his mind. The marshals stepped forward. They did not handcuff him, but they escorted him out. As he reached the door, Derek turned back. What are you going to do now, Elena, he asked. I am going to go to work, I said. I have a company to fix. He walked out. And just like that, the man who wanted to be a billionaire was officially worth less than zero. But the humiliation was only beginning. 2 weeks later, I stood in the driveway of the mansion. A moving truck was parked outside. Not a professional moving company, but a rental truck that Derek was driving himself. He was carrying a cardboard box out of the front door. It contained his clothes and a few personal items. He stopped when he saw me. I was standing by my car holding the keys to the house. This is it, he said, looking at the sprawling estate, the garden he had insisted on, the balcony where he used to smoke cigars. Leave the keys on the hood, Derek, I said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the heavy brass keyring. He placed it gently on the hood of my car. I am sorry, Elena, he said softly. I really am. I looked at him. I searched for any feeling in my heart. Anger, sadness, love. But there was nothing. He was just a stranger who had rented space in my life for too long. Goodbye, Derek, I said. He got into the truck. The engine sputtered and coughed before turning on. He drove away down the long driveway past the manicured lawns he could no longer afford. I watched him go until the truck disappeared around the bend. Then I picked up the keys. I turned and walked back into my house. My house. It was finally empty of his lies. Derek's new reality was a harsh wake-up call. He moved into a studio apartment in a rundown complex near the airport. It was the kind of place where the walls were paper-thin and the smell of boiled cabbage hung permanently in the hallway. There was no concierge. There was no gym. There was only a leaking faucet and a view of a brick wall. But the real punishment was his career, Derek Ross the visionary. CEO was unemployable. His name was toxic in the biotech world. No board would hire him. No investor would take his call. But he had to eat. He had to pay rent. So he went back to the only thing he was qualified for, sales, but not high-end medical device sales. He could not get a license for that anymore. I heard through the grapevine that he landed a job selling generic catheter supplies for a third-tier distributor. It was a commission-only job, the kind of job where you have to drive your own car and pay for your own gas. One afternoon a few months later, I had to visit a local clinic to discuss a partnership for Vance Innovations. As I walked through the waiting room, I saw him. He was sitting in the corner. He was wearing a suit that was clearly off the rack, ill-fitting and cheap. His briefcase was scuffed. He looked 10 years older. He was holding a plastic cup of lukewarm water, waiting for the doctor to see him. The receptionist called out his name. "Mr. Ross, the doctor can give you 2 minutes. Make it quick." I watched as Derek jumped up, a desperate smile plastered on his face. "Thank you," he said, his voice overly eager. "Thank you so much. I just want to show him our new line of tubing. It is very durable." He hurried down the hallway, dragging his heavy sample case. He looked like a beaten dog. This was the man who used to command rooms. This was the man who thought he was too good for me. Now he was begging for 2 minutes of a junior doctor's time to sell plastic tubes for pennies. I walked out of the clinic without him seeing me. I did not need to say anything. Life had said it all. Meanwhile, Sienna Vance was discovering that hitting rock bottom has a basement. After being fired and blacklisted, Sienna tried to maintain her lifestyle. She thought she could bounce back. She thought her beauty would save her. She thought she could find another rich man to sponsor her existence. But I had not just fired her. I had sued her. Vance Innovations filed a civil suit against Sienna for theft of trade secrets and breach of contract. We sought damages for the salary she had drawn while acting negligently. We froze her assets. The lawsuit was a masterstroke. It was not about getting the money back because I knew she did not have it. It was about ensuring she could never work in this town again. Sienna's downfall was public and humiliating. The local gossip blogs picked up the story. They called her the billion-dollar mistress. She became a pariah. The social circle she had desperate climbed into slammed its doors in her face. To pay for her defense attorney, Sienna had to liquidate everything. I saw her one Saturday afternoon. I was walking down Newberry Street, enjoying a rare moment of free time. I passed a high-end consignment shop. Inside, I saw a woman arguing with the store manager. It was Sienna. She was holding a red Birkin bag. The bag Derek had bought her with company funds. "This is worth $20,000. She was pleading, her voice shrill. "It is brand new." The manager looked unimpressed. "It is used, ma'am," he said, "and the market is flooded right now. I can give you $4,000. Take it or leave it." Sienna looked like she was about to cry. She looked at the bag, then at the manager. She looked tired. Her roots were showing. The impeccable grooming was gone, replaced by the frantic energy of survival. "Fine," she snapped. "Just give me the check." She handed over the bag. It was the last symbol of her stolen status. As she turned to leave, she saw me standing on the other side of the glass. She froze. I did not smile. I did not wave. I just looked at her. She looked at my white suit, tailored to perfection. She looked at the confidence in my stance. She looked at the woman she had called a boring housewife. Shame washed over her face, a deep, burning red shame. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and hurried out the door, turning in the opposite direction to avoid passing me. She was running. She would always be running now. Running from debts, running from her reputation, running from the truth of who she was. A few weeks later, the court ruled in our favor. Sienna was ordered to pay restitution. She declared bankruptcy the next day. Her condo was foreclosed. Her car was repossessed. She moved back to her parents' house in Ohio, a small town where everyone knew what she had done. She was 26 years old, and her life was effectively over. The price had been paid. I sat in my office at the top of the Vance Innovations Tower. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. The company was thriving. The stock was back up, trading higher than the IPO price. The neural graft was saving lives. I picked up a file from my desk. It was the final report on the asset recovery. Derek was living in poverty. Sienna was bankrupt. I closed the file and placed it in the shredder. I watched the paper turn into confetti. It was not about cruelty. It was about balance. They had tried to take a life they did not earn. They had tried to steal a future they did not build. The universe had simply corrected the accounting error. I spun my chair around to face the window. The city lights were coming on below me, a million little sparks of potential. I thought about the woman I used to be, the woman who waited at home, the woman who made herself small. She was gone. In her place sat the CEO, the mother, the owner. I picked up my phone and dialed home. "Hi, Mom," a sweet voice answered. "Emma." "Hi, sweetie," I said, my voice softening. "How was school?" "It was good," Emma said. "We learned about gravity today. The teacher said that everything that goes up must come down." I smiled. "Your teacher is very smart, Emma," I said. "That is the most important law in the world." I hung up the phone. I packed my bag. It was time to go home. Not to a house of lies, but to a home of truth. The elevator ride down felt smooth and fast. As I walked out into the crisp Boston evening, I took a deep breath. The air smelled of rain and victory. Derek and Sienna were part of the past now, cautionary tales whispered in boardrooms and cocktail parties. But I was the future, and the future looked bright. The transition from Novus MedTech to Vance Innovations was not just a change of stationery. It was a complete exorcism of the corporate soul. For the first 3 months, I worked 16-hour days. I did not do this to prove a point to the board or to the market. I did it because I had to scrub the stain of Derek's leadership from every corner of the building. We took down the gray walls and replaced them with glass. We removed the executive dining room that was only for the elite and turned it into a collaborative workspace for the engineers. We fired the sycophants who had helped Sienna hide her incompetence, and we promoted the quiet, hard workers who had been keeping the lights on. The day the new sign went up on the building was the first time I truly exhaled. I stood on the sidewalk looking up at the sleek silver letters, Vance Innovations. It was my name. It was my father's name. It was the name my daughter carried. It was no longer hidden in a shell company or buried in a filing cabinet. It was right there in the skyline of Boston, shining for everyone to see. But the most meaningful change wasn't on the stock market ticker. It was personal. With the first quarter profits, which were substantial thanks to the reinstated license and the efficient new management structure, I established the Emma Vance Foundation. For years, I had struggled silently with the challenges of raising a child on the spectrum. I knew the isolation. I knew the fight for resources. I knew the way the world looked at children who were different. Derek had always wanted to hide Emma. He wanted her to be perfect. He wanted her to fit into his image of a golden family. I wanted her to soar. The foundation opened a center in downtown Boston dedicated to providing early intervention therapy and support for families who could not afford private care. On the opening day, I stood in the sensory room watching Emma play with a light board. She was laughing. It was a pure, uninhibited sound. "Mommy, look," she said, pointing to the colors. I looked. And for the first time in my life, I felt that my success had a purpose beyond survival. I was not just building a company to spite an ex-husband. I was building a world where my daughter would be safe and celebrated. Standing in the doorway watching us was James Sterling. He had been a constant presence during the transition. He had resigned from his firm to become my general counsel. People said he was crazy to leave a senior partnership, but James just smiled and said he wanted to be on the winning team. He walked over to me now, handing me a cup of coffee. "You did good, Elena," he said quietly. I took the cup. The warmth seeped into my hands. We did good, I corrected him. I could not have done this without you, James. You saved me. James looked at me. His eyes were dark and kind. They held a depth of emotion that he had kept carefully checked for a decade. I remembered when I was a 24-year-old associate terrified of my first case. James had been there. I remembered when I told him I was getting married to Derek. James had congratulated me, but I had seen the shadow pass over his face. He had waited. He had watched. He had never crossed the line, but he had never looked away. I did not save you, Elena, he said. I just handed you the sword. You were the one who swung it. He stepped a little closer. The air between us shifted. It was not the electric volatile chemistry I had with Derek. It was something slower, something warmer. It felt like safety. I am not ready, James, I whispered. I am still healing. I am still learning who I am when I am not fighting a war. I know, he said. He reached out and brushed a stray hair from my forehead. His touch was gentle, reverent. I have waited 10 years, Elena, he said. I can wait a little longer. I am not going anywhere. I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future that included a partner. A real partner. Someone who admired my brain, not just my appearance. Someone who loved my daughter. Someone who knew my scars and did not ask me to hide them. Thank you, I said. He smiled and walked away to talk to the center director, leaving me with the promise hanging in the air. It was enough. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel in New York City was even more opulent than the Four Seasons in Boston had been. This was the Global Business Summit. The room was filled with billionaires, politicians, and industry titans. But this time I was not standing in the back near the velvet ropes. I was not wearing a beige dress. I was sitting at table 1. I was wearing a midnight blue velvet gown that hugged my figure and commanded attention. My hair was swept back, revealing diamond earrings that I had bought for myself. I was surrounded by my team. James was on my right, looking dashing in a tuxedo. Marcus, the chairman, was on my left, looking smug and happy as the stock price had tripled under my leadership. The lights dimmed. The host walked onto the stage, and now the host announced, for the most prestigious award of the evening, the Entrepreneur of the Year. This award goes to a leader who not only disrupted the market, but redefined resilience. A leader who took a company from the brink of collapse and turned it into the industry standard for ethical innovation. Please welcome the CEO of Vance Innovations, Elena Vance. The applause was deafening. It was not polite applause. It was a roar of respect. I stood up. I walked to the stage. My legs did not shake. My heart did not race. I walked with the easy grace of a woman who owns the room. I took the microphone. The spotlight was blinding, but I did not blink. Thank you, I said. I looked out at the sea of faces. A year ago, I stood in a room like this and watched someone else take credit for my work I began. I was invisible. I was a wife. I was a mother. And I was told that those titles made me weak. I was told that I did not understand the business. I paused. The room was silent. I learned a hard lesson that night. I learned that silence is not a virtue. I learned that sacrifice without boundaries is just self-destruction. And I learned that if you want a seat at the table, you sometimes have to build the table yourself. There were nods in the audience. Women were looking at me with shining eyes. This award is not for me, I continued. It is for every woman who has ever been told she is too emotional to lead. It is for every mother who has been told her career is over. It is for anyone who has been underestimated. The world will try to write your story for you. Do not let them. Pick up the pen and write your own ending. The applause started again, louder this time. I smiled. I held the trophy up. It was heavy. It felt good. As the applause washed over me, I looked down from the stage. My eyes scanned the shadows at the edge of the room where the service staff were standing. And then I saw him. He was holding a tray of empty champagne glasses. He was wearing a generic white waiter's jacket that was a size too big for him. His hair was thinning. His face was lined with the stress of a life that had not turned out the way he planned. It was Derek. He was looking up at me. Our eyes met across the dazzling distance of the ballroom. I expected to feel triumph. I expected to feel a surge of vindictive joy. I wanted to see him suffer. But as I looked at him, I realized something profound. I did not feel anything. I did not feel hate. I did not feel anger. I did not feel pity. He was just a man holding a tray. He was a footnote in my biography. He was a lesson I had learned and moved on from. He looked small. He looked insignificant. The golden god who had stood on the stage a year ago had completely vanished, leaving behind only this hollow shell. He watched me holding the trophy. I saw his throat work as he swallowed. I saw the regret in his eyes. It was a vast, bottomless regret. He knew. In that moment, he knew exactly what he had thrown away. He wasn't just looking at a successful CEO. He was looking at the woman who had loved him, who had built him, who would have given him the world if he had just been decent. He looked down at his tray, unable to hold my gaze. He turned and disappeared into the kitchen doors, back into the obscurity he deserved. I turned back to the audience. I looked at James, who was clapping his hands raised high, beaming at me with pride and love. I looked at the future stretching out before me, bright and limitless. I raised the trophy slightly in a silent toast, not to Derek, but to myself, to the girl who wrote code on napkins, to the mother who fought for her child, to the lawyer who read the fine print. I smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached my eyes. The past was dead, the debt was paid, and I was finally free. They think that when women step back into the shadows of domestic life, we become weak. They mistake our silence for submission and our patience for surrender. They forget that the tiger only steps back to generate momentum for the kill. Derek and Sienna learned the hard way that you should never underestimate the woman who holds the copyright to your life. Because while they were busy playing checkers, I was mastering the game of chess. Now I want to hear from you. Do you think Derek got off too easy with just poverty and humiliation? Or do you think he deserved to spend time behind bars for what he did? Let me know in the comments below. If you think justice was served, type karma. And if you enjoyed watching a cheater get exactly what he deserved, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. I have many more stories to tell, and trust me, you do not want to miss the next one. Until next time, remember to know your worth and never sign away your power.